Greetings, ladies and melodians, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called They Are Barely Better Than Cavemen, written by Runner 1. The briefing of the Kalurian High Council had been succinct. A new inhabitant world had been discovered in a previously unexplored arm of the galaxy. A long-forgotten scout probe had followed an unexplained EM signal and found a nickel-iron world in the habitation zone of a moderately sized yellow-white star. The newly scanned world showed a planet with atmosphere conducive to carbon-based life, with easily accessible resources, and a mass that would be perfect outpost and colony world for the Kalurian people. A follow-up manned probe had found that the EM signal was due to the activity of the world's indigenous people. Humans, they called themselves. As serendipitous observation had revealed, the human population of the world was in excess of 8 billion, an obviously astonishingly high population when considering the physical size of the world. It was clear that the humans were reproducing at an alarmingly high and unsustainable rate, far in excess of what any intelligent planet-bound society could tolerate. This was the primary argument the colonization committee had used to get the humans declared as a Class 4 species. Though the Kalurian hegemony was composed of many different species from different worlds, position in Kalurian society was completely determined and controlled by your species class. Kalurian species class ranged from 1 to 6. A Class 6 species was lower life with little to no sapience, what many humans might consider animals. A Class 6 species was considered to be no interest and a little more than a nuisance or a source of protein. A Class 5 species was any sapient species that had not yet reached industrialization. Class 5 species were generally used for general labor and menial tasks, workers, servants, medical experiments, etc. A Class 4 species was any life form that had progressed to general use of machines and labor-saving devices. Class 4 species generally had not conquered space travel and more advanced technologies. Class 4 species were also used for labor, but were generally placed in more advanced positions of responsibility, but were absolutely considered to be unworthy of inclusion in general Kalurian society. Species of classes 1 through 3 were the only species considered worthy of inclusion in the Kalurian society. Class 1 was the ruling class. You must be a Class 1 species to ever have any possibility of being included in the Kalurian policy-making or political decisions. Classes 2 and 3 were members of general Kalurian society. Everything from laborers, technical, medical, and scientific positions were reserved for Class 2 and 3. Species of Class 4 through 6 had no rights under Kalurian law and were seen only as property. Several Kalurian council members had argued that the newly discovered humans were clearly at least a Class 3 species and thus must be protected as future members of the Kalurian hegemony. But they had been overruled by the council members who argued that any reasonably intelligent species would never behave in such a self-destructive fashion. The proponents of Class 4 classification had pointed out that rudimentary space travel and even higher-level technology did not automatically classify species as Class 3. It was clear that the humans' propensity for war and self-destruction clearly demonstrated that humanity was not ready for inclusion in Kalurian society. At the end of the High Council meeting, it was decided that the humans were a Class 4 species, and as such were clearly the property of the newly expanded Kalurian hegemony. Seeing that the inhabitable worlds were few and far between, it was soon determined that the planet known as Earth would be officially claimed as a colony world for the Kalurian people. An annexation mission was quickly planned. A fleet of Kalurian processing ships were dispatched to the human planet. The mission was simple. The humans' population would be reduced to a more sustainable and controllable level. An initial Kalurian outpost would be established, and the remaining human animals would be retrained to serve the Kalurian people when they arrived. The projected population reduction was based on several factors, primarily planet and resource size, as well as making the numbers of humans more reasonable by management of the Kalurian overseers. All of this was determined completely unemotionally and scientifically using formulas determined eons ago by the first Calorian hegemony. The final numbers determined by Calorian computers was just over 100 million. This would necessitate the extermination just under 8 billion humans. General Jatuk was selected as leader of the processing fleet. General Jatuk was a member of the Jewel people, a Class 1 society integrated into Calorian hegemony nearly 3 millennia earlier. This was his third annexation mission. General Jatuk sat in his quarters reviewing the mission briefing. The humans had been classified as Class 4. The mission required him to exterminate the majority of the humans, grossly overpopulating the planet known as Earth. Then he was instructed to establish a Calorian outpost and processing facility to prepare the planet for colonization. The remaining humans would be retrained in a processing facility to prepare them as laborers for the soon-to-be-arriving Calorian colonists. As he reviewed his orders, he noted that the numbers of humans populating the planet was unbelievably high. Never in his life had he witnessed a planet so incredibly overpopulated. On his last annexation meeting, the target planet hosted a population of just over 800 million. That population had been reduced to just under 80 million, a completely reasonable number for the incoming Calorian colonists to manage. But this planet, Earth, hosted a population of over 8 billion. At first, he thought the number was a misprint. Surely no planet the size of this one could support so many life forms. The most populous planet in the Calorian hegemony was Cestus 3, and it hosted over 1 billion Calorian citizens, and it was nearly 20% larger than this Earth. As he sat reading the reports, he realized why this mission was so large. When he'd been picked to lead this mission, he had been caught off guard by the size of the fleet that he'd been chosen to lead. 15 capital ships, each more than 10 kilometers in size, hosting nearly 1,000 crew and more than 1 million extermination professionals. Never in his life had he seen such a large annexation expedition. In fact, he didn't even realize that the Calorian hegemony had 15 million extermination professionals. Perhaps many had been quickly trained for just this mission. Even with 15 million extermination professionals working, it could take months to reduce the Earth's population to manageable levels. Reviewing the intelligence on the new world, he formulated a plan of action. The planet Earth had several large land masses separated by water. General Jatuk decided that he would place his fleet in high orbit and then send down 3 scout ships, followed by 3 more capital ships, to begin the eradication of the humans. Once these ships and their crews had completed their initial operations and secured a foothold, the remaining capital ships would land and continue the process. Intelligence had determined that the humans did have rudimentary spaceflight and aerial capability, but the humans relied on reaction engines for power. Rockets, General Jatuk snickered under his breath. Rockets would be as effective against our technology as throwing pebbles at a charging beast. Soon, General Jatuk moved his fleet into orbit of the blue-green planet known as Earth. This was no doubt that his fleet of 15 10-kilometer ships was clearly visible from the planet's surface. As he prepared for the initial incursion on the planet, he wondered what the humans were thinking. It was common for lesser advanced societies to view Calorians as gods. Often, lower species would attempt to pray and offer sacrifices to the Calorian colonists, believing them to be gods who had somehow been angered by their actions or inactions. It didn't matter. He had a job to do. This planet would be pacified and its remaining people processed to serve the Calorian hegemony. However, instead of prayers and offerings, General Jatuk was surprised when he was notified that an incredibly powerful EM signal was being transmitted directly to the Calorian fleet. The ship's computer had determined that the signal was the equivalent of a "Hello, welcome to Earth" message. Not really the first contact that he had expected, or perhaps fortuitous. Perhaps this mission will go smoothly, he thought to himself. They seem to be more intelligent than we expected. I will inform them of the great blessing of being annexed into Calorian hegemony, and once I explain to them the necessity of reducing the population to sustainable and manageable levels, I'm sure they will understand. General Jatuk could not have been more wrong. his initial conference had been with the Secretary General of something called the United Nations. The Secretary General had been flanked on both sides by several people of which General Jatuk came to understand were leaders of the most powerful nation-states on the planet. Instead of the reasonable response that General Jatuk expected, he was surprised by their reactions. When he had explained the situation to them, the whole meeting had devolved into a shouting match, which the humans declared war on General Jatuk and his fleet. No matter how much he tried to reason with the humans, he was rebuffed with vitriol and hatred. He patiently tried to explain how advanced the technology of the Kalurians was. He tried his best to make it clear that the humans had absolutely no ability to stand against the Kalurian hegemony. One of the humans Jatuk thought he said he was American had told him to go do something physically impossible to himself. Finally, out of exasperation, Jatuk had ended the vid conference and began to move forward with his orders. Returning to his original plan, General Jatuk dispatched the initial 3 scout ships towards the planet's surface. As expected, they were met with the primitive aerial vehicles of the humans. Also, as expected, the descending scout ships made short work of the attacking human craft. Using their directed energy weapons and gravity manipulation equipment, the scout ships deftly wiped the attacking craft from the sky as easily as one might smack a bug from the air. By the time the scout ships had completed their part of the mission, more than 100 human craft had been swatted from the air with no more effort than it would take to remove an annoying hair from in front of your eyes. The initial scout ship campaign had proceeded without incident, and General Jatuk gave the order for the 3 capital ships to begin their part of the mission. As before, the capital ships were attacked by human ships, but this time the human ships were ignored with a little more effort than one would expend walking through a cloud of gnats. Hundreds of human ships fell from the sky as the colossal capital ships descended to the planet's surface. Once there, the ships began disgorging their extermination professionals. On the ground, they were met with what appeared to be human armies. Unbelievably, in the short time since their arrival, the humans had seemed to amass armies numbering in the millions. No matter, thought General Jatuk, as he watched the events unfolding on his view screens, just saves us the time of hunting them down. As he watched thousands of human troops vanish in puffs of vapor, as the Kalurian incinerated them to gas. The human slug-throwing weapons, on the other hand, were as useless as a child's toys against the Kalurian armor. Oh, from time to time a human would get lucky, and a Kalurian would fall, mortally wounded. But for every Kalurian that fell, more than 1,000 humans fell. Well, casualties are expected on a mission like this, Jatuk thought to himself, as he watched the fracas unfolding on his screen. Suddenly, the humans seemed to stop fighting. It was as though a single command had been heard by every human at the same moment. In a single motion, the humans stopped fighting, turned, and moved quickly away from the Kalurian landing site. The retreat of the humans was so sudden, so fast, and so well coordinated that it left many of the Kalurian exterminators standing scratching their heads. In a matter of minutes, not a single living human could be seen in any direction. In moments, General Jatuk's view screen went from a cacophony of battle to dead silence as Kalurian exterminators tried to ascertain where all the humans had gone. Turning to his first lieutenant, Jatuk requested a scan of the area. General Jatuk, replied his lieutenant, it appears that there are now virtually no humans anywhere near the capital ships. What? Exclaimed Jatuk. Where did they go? Well, replied the lieutenant, on reviewing the scanners, it appears the majority of the humans were moving away from the landing sites the whole time. The ones resisting have now begun to board high-speed transports and are quickly leaving the area. I don't understand, replied General Jatuk. Eyeing his console, the lieutenant continued to speak. It appears, the lieutenant paused for a long moment as he assessed the situation, that the humans that were resisting the Kalurian exterminators were simply a delaying tactic, by buying time, so to speak, for the other humans to escape the area. Escape? To where and why? Don't they understand that they can't hide from our senses? They are just delaying the inevitable. Of course, General, continued the lieutenant. But our scans confirm that there are very few humans within 25 kilometers of the perimeter of any of our capital ships, and the distance seems to be widening. Very well. Order the extermination squad leaders to form back up. We will regroup into standard eradication phalanxes. The general looked down at the timeline on his personal data device. I was hoping that their resistance would actually speed things up. Leaning back and exhaling as he continued, I guess that we will just stick to my original timeline estimate. A few moments passed while General Took watched the view screens as his extermination professionals arranged into squads. Various ground and air vehicles were being unloaded from the capital ships. He watched the work with pride, thinking about the coming day when he could walk back into the Calorian High Council chambers and hand another pacified world ready for colonization over to the hegemony. I guess they will give me another medal, he thought. Just then, his thoughts were interrupted by his third-in-command. General Jitu, I'm seeing something strange on my global scanners. Turning towards the station over his left shoulder. What is it, Lieutenant? He said to General. I just registered several missile launches from a remote area in one of the western continents. No, they're trying to attack us with their primitive chemical rockets. The general smirked as he watched the readout. According to my readings, the missiles appear to be ballistic projectiles. The first one appears to be headed for the Dominator. As you remember, you assigned the Dominator to the eastern region of the Western Hemisphere for eradication. That missile should reach its destination in about 8 minutes their time. The other two projectiles seem to be on a polar arc, headed for the other two capital ships on the primary continent of their Western Hemisphere. They'll take a few minutes longer. So I did. General Jituk rubbed his chin as he looked at the numbers on his screen. Well, at that speed they might do some minor damage, but I don't think it's anything to worry too much about. Notify Captain Lamata of the Dominator, as well as the other captains, about the incoming projectiles. They might want to hit them with the heat beam to soften them up before impact. I doubt that we'll see more than a splattering of hot metal on the hulls of our ships. Yes, sir, replied the lieutenant. General Jituk turned back to his view screens to watch the preparations. Of course, he was watching the Dominator. It was the pride of the Calorian fleet. A few minutes passed as the troops continued to mobilize. No, not the troops, he quickly corrected himself. The Calorians were so far beyond these humans, referring to the extermination professionals as troops as an insult to the Calorian military. Suddenly, a beam of light could be seen emanating from the turret on the top of the Dominator. Ah! The general thought to himself. Captain Lamata was hitting the incoming projectiles with a heat ray. That should soften the falling objects up and turn it to liquid, thought the general. It would be little more than warm rain on the hull of the massive Dominator. Suddenly, there was the ever so brief flash of white light, and all his view screens went dark at the same moment. What happened? Exclaimed the general as he turned back towards the lieutenants at the stations behind him. A few moments of silence followed as every officer on the bridge scanned their readouts in confusion. I don't know, sir, finally answered the second-in-command. All contact with the Dominator has been lost. Lost? What do you mean, lost? Replied the general. I don't know, sir. One moment everything was completely normal, and the next it was nothing. The lieutenant continued operating various controls in a desperate attempt to understand the readouts he was seeing. Long moments passed while the bridge around him was in chaos of disorientation and confusion. Give me a moment to acquire an orbital view. Suddenly, the color drained from the face of the third officer. It's gone. His lips shook and his fingers trembled as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Gone? Growled the general. What do you mean, gone? The Dominator, sir, added the lieutenant, his voice breaking as he tried to form the words. The Dominator is gone, sir. Gone? Exclaimed the general as he jumped to his feet and rushed to the lieutenant's side. The display showed an orbital view of the eastern part of the largest continent in the western hemisphere of the planet called Earth, where just shortly before, could be seen the hulking mass of the 10-kilometer diameter Dominator was nothing but a flaming wasteland as far as the eye could see. Above this hellish landscape, a 30-kilometer mushroom cloud was quickly billowing high into the stratosphere. What happened? What have I seen? Shrieked the general, his voice raising an octave with each breath. General, came the voice from the science officer. According to these readings, the general turned towards the ensign, working in the science station. The Dominator was destroyed by a nuclear attack. The general turned back towards the view screens, displaying the other 2 capital ships on the surface of the planet. Nuclear weapons, he exclaimed. How could a Class 4 society field nuclear weapons? Get word to the captains. Warn them. As the general was speaking, there were 2 bright flashes of light, and the remaining 2 capital ships disappeared from view. The general slunk down into his chair. More than 3 million Calorian dead in the blink of an eye. How was this even possible? Nuclear weapons had been outlawed across the galaxy eons ago. No race was even allowed to study them. Nuclear weapon technology was the most carefully protected and secured knowledge in the galaxy. Yet somehow these humans barely above cavemen had not only constructed nuclear weapons, but somehow had managed to enhance them far beyond anyone's wildest imagination. How was it even possible to build even a nuclear weapon powerful enough to destroy not 1, but 3 of the largest vessels in the Calorian fleet? Not only that, but why had the heat rays used by each of the now dead captains seemed to have no effect at all on the approaching devices? General Jituk, the voice of his science officer interrupted his thoughts. Yes, I have analyzed the destruction of those other 2 capital ships. And? The weapons used were not normal nuclear devices. No single nuclear weapon has the destructive potential we just witnessed. I know that, sneered the despondent general. So tell me, what was it that the humans used? According to my data, sir, the humans utilized multiple fusion warheads. Fusion devices? The general looked incredulous. How, in the name of the gods, could a primitive race like the humans even conceive of triggering a single fusion release, much less such detonations, at the exact same moment? I was closely monitoring the projectiles as they descended towards the other 2 eradication ships. Continue. As near as I can deduce, the fusion devices that destroyed our ships were triggered by a fission device. By the gods, you must be mistaken. No, sir, continued the ensign. It appears that the humans have designed fusion devices that are triggered by the detonation of a fission device. But why did the heat rays have no effect on the incoming devices? I could clearly see that Captain Lamata fired on the incoming projectiles with the Dominator's heat ray, as did the other 2 captains. The ensign swallowed a lump in his throat. I reviewed the playback of the human attack. Although only 3 chemical-powered missiles were launched, each one seemed to carry at least 4, and maybe as many as 8 thermonuclear devices. The ensign turned the view screen so that the general could see what he was describing. Here at Apogee, the ensign pointed at the top several curved dotted lines. Each launch vehicle seemed to expel its payload of devices. Each device seemed to have simply descended towards their targets ballistically and completely independently, since the devices were suborbital devices traveling at hypersonic velocities. It is reasonable to assume that each device carried a significant amount of ablative heat shielding. Considering the speed at which they were traveling, they would have been exposed to the heat rays for only moments. And, with multiple incoming devices with ablative shielding, the general added, there would not have been enough time for the heat rays to have any effect. No, sir. The ensign's analysis was concise and detailed, especially considering how quickly he had compiled the data. The general decided in that moment to recommend him for a commendation as soon as they returned to the Calorian home world. But now what? Thought the general. The fact that these humans possessed fusion devices with an admittedly primitive but effective delivery system changed the mission parameters significantly. A ground-based extermination process now seemed completely impractical. I better contact the Council for further instructions. General Chituk. As the general was mulling over his options, his second-in-command's voice interrupted his thoughts. Yes, Lieutenant? I was reviewing the data from earlier. And? A short time ago, our scan has detected several mole launches from various locations all over the planet. Why wasn't I notified? In the confusion of the destruction of our 3 ships on the planet's surface, we simply overlooked them. Spinning in place, the general screamed, Find them! Find them now! I want to know where those rockets are headed. In moments, the ensign spoke up. I have them, sir. Sir? There was a long pause. The missiles are already dispersed their payloads. Where are they headed? Screamed the general. The ensign's face went white as the blood drained from it. He couldn't speak. He simply raised his trembling hand and pointed towards the main viewport at the front of the bridge. General Chituk turned towards the often ignored window at the front of the ship. His brain did not even have time to register what his eyes were showing him. There, just meters away, was a cloud of cone-shaped objects traveling straight towards his face at hypersonic velocities. Had it not been for the fact that the only thing in normal space that travels faster than these dozen or so cone-shaped harbingers of death was light itself, his retinas would have never even sensed the photons that fell on them. As it was, before the signals could even travel along the short bundle of nerves from his eyes to his brain, the fuses triggered. Milliseconds later, spherical high-explosive charges leapt to life, compressing the plutonium at their hearts, more than doubling its density in nanoseconds. A split nanosecond later, untold trillions of plutonium atoms began to split as the freed neutrons cascaded through the excitable element. X-rays intense enough to melt a building-sized mass of lead poured forth from the primal forces being unleashed by a tennis ball size of massive metal. These rays, more powerful than those released by a star, impacted a secretive material known as fog bank, quicker than light could traverse the width of a human hair. This material became plasma, hotter than the surface of the sun. Sitting at the core of this conflagration was another small sphere of plutonium surrounded by caustic material. The raging forces of creation compressed the caustic lithium deuteride inwards towards the golf ball-sized sphere of silvery metal. Only nanoseconds had passed since the fuses triggered. As the signals rushed along the nerves from General Chituk's eyes towards his brain, his body evaporated in a hellish inferno hotter than the core of a star. His brain never even registered the flash of light from the detonation. All these apocalyptic energies unleashed by the primitives, barely better than cavemen on the planet that spun slowly below. Across the surface of Earth, millions of people turned their eyes skyward. For long moments, the planet had 12 new suns hanging in the sky. But slowly, the primal forces unleashed by humanity waned. The fireballs slowly disappeared, leaving only twinkling embers in their place. As the darkness returned and the stars once again shone forth, mankind breathed a collective sigh of relief. Nightmarish weapons that for decades were feared to be the end of humanity had become its salvation. End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Dragon Soup, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Red Panda 121, Leslie 517, Bushmaster 177, Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Sans the Skeleton, Lightjock, Dragzoon WRE, and Lord Azrakal. Thank you very much.